I was never a fan of online dating. It always seemed to me that it was only for two types of people: those who were desperate for love and those who wanted to have affairs with anyone. However, this was the thinking of a woman who had been married for 5 years to the love of her life, and whom everyone considered the perfect man, even me. Unfortunately, perfection does not exist, and the more perfect a person seems to be, the darker the secret hidden behind that facade. And well, I had to learn that lesson the hard way, when I discovered that the man I had fallen in love with and to whom I had sworn eternal love at the altar actually had a preference for other men, and during all the time we were together, he was cheating on me with many men whom he knew precisely through online dating sites. As you can imagine, discovering that was a devastating blow, and the divorce process was even more so. After that terrible bitter pill, I entered a stage in which I was totally denied to love. I didn't want to meet men. I didn't want to date anyone. I was totally closed to the possibility of finding a new partner for fear of getting my heart broken again. My friends always insisted that I should give myself a second chance. They even introduced me to a couple of prospects, but it never came to anything. But after almost 2 years, my girls thought it was enough celibacy for me. So without consulting me, they opened a profile on Tinder. At first I was furious. It seemed to me a complete lack of respect that they took that attribution without telling me anything. But after a long discussion, I understood that they were partly right. It was time to give love a new chance, or at least start meeting people and have a good time. After all, loneliness had not been the best companion either. The girls showed me the app and showed me how to use it. I'm sure they thought that as soon as they left my apartment, I would delete my profile. And yes, I did think about it, but I didn't do it. A couple of weeks went by, and one afternoon when I was a bit bored and had a few glasses of wine, I looked at the app on my cell phone and said to myself, why not? The first thing that surprised me was the amount of likes that my profile had. I did not expect it. So I started to examine the profiles and photos of those who had seen mine, but no one seemed interesting to me. However, when I was about to give up and put my cell phone aside to continue drinking, I came across his profile, Alvaro's profile. From the moment I saw his picture, it was like a kind of immediate click. He was very handsome, dark hair, well-defined features, but he also had a charming smile and a very intense look. I think that was what attracted me immediately. He seemed to have that halo of mystery and sensuality that no woman is indifferent to. Alvaro looked to be in his 30s and had a fairly brief description in his profile. This one said, "Lover of nature, art and night, walks in pleasant company." Without waiting for anything, I matched with him, and to my total surprise, just a few seconds later, I received his first message. "Hi Paula, I would like to meet you." My God, I was so excited. It was completely crazy the way I felt, because this was someone I had only seen a picture of. But for some reason, this man aroused an immediate fascination in me. I immediately responded, and we started talking. We chatted for almost the whole night and exchanged numbers. Everything went very fast. He was absolutely charming and very eloquent. We had many things in common, or so he made me believe. The truth is that at the end of our very long talk, he told me he wanted to meet me personally and invited me to a well-known Italian restaurant in the city. That day I arrived at work awake, but during the whole day I did nothing but think about that meeting. I had not felt like that since my first date with my ex-husband. I was very excited and anxious to meet him. When I remember that day, I feel very silly. It is incredible that with almost 30 and a bitter divorce behind me, I was still so naive and trusting. I got home early so I could get ready and look beautiful for my date. Obviously, I chose my best outfit. I let my tangled hair down and straightened it so it would look fabulous. And I did my star makeup, the one I only do when I want to make an impact. Dressed to kill, I arrived at the restaurant a little before the scheduled time, and as I got out of the cab, I saw him from afar waiting for me at the entrance. He was even more handsome in person and was very well dressed. He had a white shirt that highlighted the color of his skin and a pair of dark jeans. He greeted me with a hug and a kiss on the cheek, making me feel immediately at ease. The dinner was wonderful. Alvaro was very nice and seemed to know a lot about art and literature, and everything was going very well until something happened that I found very disturbing. And that is that at one point the waitress who brought our plates tripped and the food almost fell on him. Nothing happened. But at that moment his reaction seemed to me disproportionately aggressive towards the girl. He got up suddenly and started yelling at her that she was an idiot and almost filled him with pasta. He was a big man and stood in front of this thin and small girl with a very intimidating posture, almost as if he was going to hit her. She apologized repeatedly, but he kept saying derogatory things until I intervened and asked him to calm down. And then he looked at me and it was as if he realized the situation and quickly changed his attitude, smiled at me as if nothing and said, "You're right, sorry girl," addressing the waitress. That really set me off. It was a strange and excessive episode. He had been so nice and jovial that I never thought he could have such an aggressive side. From that moment on, the atmosphere changed. He tried to resume the fun and pleasant tone of our conversation, but I was really shocked. I still went along with it so as not to ruin things even more. Other than that, dinner was delicious, and he went out of his way to make me feel comfortable again. After dinner, he invited me to continue the evening and go for a drink or a walk, but I politely refused, saying that I had work the next day, and quickly said goodbye to him with a kiss on the cheek. But when I was leaving, Alvaro took me by the hand and asked me to apologize for what happened. He told me that he knew he was like that for what happened a moment ago, but explained that he had had a terrible day and that I was the only good thing that had happened, and he did not want this to be ruined by his clumsiness. Then he asked me to go with him for a walk in his favorite place, a park that was near there, and that he told me it was really beautiful to walk in the evening in that place. There I remembered what he said in his profile about liking night walks. He told me that he would take me home afterwards. For a moment I hesitated, but as incredibly stupid as it sounds, I believed him, and yes, I agreed to go with him, like a cow to the slaughter. We arrived at the place, and yes, the truth is that it was really beautiful. The moon was clear, and the way it illuminated the trees and the cobblestone paths was simply spectacular. As we walked, we talked about everything from our hobbies to our deepest dreams. However, as we went along, an uneasy feeling came over me. It was like a kind of alert that my intuition emitted, and with every step I took, it was screaming at me that something was not right. As we walked and chatted, Alvaro led us further and further away from the main trail, taking us deeper and deeper into the wooded area, the darkest and farthest part of the park. I stopped for a moment, but trying not to let the nervousness that was taking over me show. Then I asked him where we were going. He looked at me and kindly said, "Trust me." Once again, I fell under the spell of that deep and enchanting gaze he had, and just like that, I again ignored all the alarms and followed him deep into the forest. Once there, however, the spell was broken in one fell swoop, literally. At one point, while we were still walking and I was talking like a parrot about the things I would like to do in the future, and all the good things that were to come in my life, I noticed that Alvaro stayed behind me. So I turned around to see him, and all I saw was a huge piece of wood coming right towards my face. By pure instinct, I managed to cover myself with my hands at the moment Alvaro attacked me with a piece of wood. I fell backwards on the ground, dizzy and with a strong pain on the right side of my head and also in my hands. I barely stammered 2 or 3 words when Alvaro pounced on me and began to squeeze my neck and shout expletives at him. I couldn't breathe, and with his weight on top of me, I couldn't move either, but I struggled with all my might to break free from his grip. Then, I remembered something I had seen on TV and realized that this was the perfect time to find out if it really worked. As best I could, I grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it in his face. He immediately started screaming and squeezing his eyes. Then I knew that I would not have another chance to escape alive from that place. So with the little breath I had left and with adrenaline overflowing my body, I ran and ran as much as I could, trying to remember where we had come from. For a stretch, I managed to hear his footsteps running behind me, but then I didn't hear him again. As best I could, I reached the main road and signaled the first car I saw, which fortunately stopped. The driver was an elderly man, and when he saw me, he opened his eyes wide. I felt my face wet, and when I looked at my hands, I realized that they were full of blood. Before he asked me anything, I said, "Get me out of here, quick." The man understood immediately, helped me into the car, and drove as fast as he could. When we were in the car, words got stuck in my throat as I told Grandpa what had happened, while he just kept repeating that everything was going to be okay, as he drove to the nearest police station. There I was met by 2 police officers who took my statement and gave me support. I gave them all the details I could remember about Alvaro, from his name to a description of his appearance and any other information that might be useful to help in his capture. I called one of my friends from the police station, and after a few minutes they all arrived on the scene to give me their support. Then I was taken to the hospital to receive medical assistance for my injuries. Fortunately, these did not turn out to be of major concern, and the next day I was discharged and was able to return home. The first thing I did was to submerge myself in the bathtub and take a hot water bath, trying a little to remove the feeling of dirt and fear that I could almost feel on my skin. But what I could never do was to erase from my mind the image of those dark eyes that captivated me so much when I saw him for the first time, full of the purest evil, staring at me, while his hands clung to my neck and stole my life little by little. It took days of panic and anguish before the police finally informed me that they had caught Alvaro, and it was then that I could finally sleep peacefully. However, this served as a lifelong experience for me. Never trust a stranger, no matter how charming, and never ignore your sixth sense, because when your intuition tells you that something is not right, it is because it is not. Needless to say, I deleted my Tinder profile. However, a few months later, I met a fabulous man in a coffee shop with whom I started a relationship, and to this day we are together. So I did find love after all. In 2018, I was an ordinary 19-year-old girl like any other, with a university degree in progress, a monotonous job, and a group of friends with whom I used to go out on the weekends to have fun around, with no traumas, no worries, and a very positive way of looking at life and the future. However, all that changed radically on a Saturday night when I decided to venture into the world of online dating. After a grueling week between college tests and my job at a coffee shop, I decided to relax a bit and let myself spend the night at home watching movies on Netflix and eating fried food. However, after a while, I felt inside me the urge to do something different, something exciting that would make me break the routine. So after thinking for a while, I came up with the brilliant idea of downloading the famous dating app Tinder. After all, everyone was using it, and I thought maybe it would be fun to meet someone new and hang out. As I was sliding my finger across the screen looking at profiles and pictures of men of all tastes and colors, I suddenly saw his picture on the screen, and it caught my attention immediately. His name was Ivan, and he was a really attractive guy. He looked a bit older to me, but that gave him a plus, as I had never dated older men. Although he wasn't that much older, he was 40. But to tell the truth, he looked like he was in his 30s. Ivan was tall, fair-skinned, green-eyed, and had a sort of mysterious, vampiric air about him that made me very curious. I immediately slid to the right, and just a few minutes later, I received the notification that I had been a match. That meant that Ivan was also interested in me. That gave me a lot of excitement, and I felt a tingle running through my body as I read his first message. "Hello, Valeria. You are beautiful. I would really like to meet you. Would you like to go out with me tonight for a drink?" I didn't think twice and accepted immediately. He asked me where I lived. He told me he could come for me, but I told him it was better to meet him on the spot. I didn't think it was very wise for a stranger to know where I live, so we agreed to meet at a cozy sushi restaurant in the center of the city. I prepared myself carefully and made sure to choose my best dress. I wanted to make a good impression and look as attractive as possible. I was dying to meet that mysterious man I had met on Tinder and see what could come out of it. When I arrived at the place, he was already waiting for me at a table. The pictures didn't lie, he really was very attractive. However, as the evening progressed, I realized that not only was he handsome, but he was also a charming and funny guy. He knew how to keep an interesting conversation going and always had a witty response to each of my comments. He seemed to be a very cultured man and had fascinating stories from his travels around the world. I was delighted with his company. He smelled delicious, and that vampiric aura I told you about at the beginning could be felt more intensely having him in front of me. At the end of the night, I was attracted to him in every way. He was such a gentleman, so I agreed to let him take me home, and when I parked, I said goodbye to him with a tender kiss on the cheek. I didn't want to go in such a hurry either, but I was dying to go out with him again. So when he proposed to see me again, I didn't hesitate for a second. This was only the first of several dates. We saw each other several times in the following weeks, but always in public places, restaurants, cafes, the cinema, even once we went to visit the zoo. No matter where we went, I always had a wonderful time with him. Ivan made me realize the huge difference from dating a mature man to dating someone my age, as our conversations were always fascinating and fun, and he seemed to know everything. We could engage in conversation on absolutely any topic, and it would always be great. I was becoming more and more attracted to him, and at every opportunity he made it clearer to me that this attraction was mutual. But he was giving me my time, and I thought that was very sweet of him. However, after several weeks, he finally invited me to his house for an intimate dinner. I accepted delighted, because I really wanted to know him in private, and not only in the sense that you can imagine, but his life, his house. I wanted to know everything about him. With all that in mind, we arrived at her house, which was in an exclusive residential area of the city. When we arrived, I was surprised by how sophisticated the place was. The decoration was so exquisite that it looked like something out of an interior design magazine. At that moment, I realized that my apartment sucked and that I was really poor. Ivan poured me a glass of wine, and his charming smile made me feel that I was in the right place. The dinner was delicious, but as the evening progressed, I noticed a couple of things that made me a little uneasy. First of all, I noticed that there were a series of strange symbols scattered on the walls of the house, things that seemed to be taken out of a book of occultism, and the other were a couple of statuettes that looked like demonic figures, one of which seemed to be staring at me by the way. However, when I asked him about it, Ivan just laughed and told me that those were a couple of souvenirs he had brought back from some of his trips to exotic places. His answer wasn't too convincing, but I didn't want to read too much into it. Maybe he had a sort of penchant for collecting things like that. But deep inside me, there was a little red light flickering that made me feel that something was not quite right in that place. After all, it did fit the description of a vampire's house, but again I decided to ignore it all and just enjoy the evening by his side. After dinner, he took me to a kind of private room. This was the most intimate space of the enclosure, a place that he described as cozy, but that seemed to me rather gloomy. There was a collection of ancient books and strange artifacts that seemed to be taken from medieval times. He explained to me that he was a great fan of the occult arts, and that he liked to study about ancient cultures and their beliefs. While he was talking to me about this, he turned his back to me to look for an object he wanted to show me, and at that moment I took a book that caught my attention, since it was made of leather and seemed to be very old. But when I opened it, I found something very disturbing. The book was full of photographs of young girls like me naked, with their bodies covered with the same symbols I had seen on the walls of the house, and lying with their arms and legs stretched over what seemed to be a pentagram of those that are used in satanic rituals. I got so nervous that the book fell out of my hands and the photos were scattered all over the floor. Then Ivan turned around and realized what had happened. For a moment, we both looked at each other in complete silence. My heart began to beat 1,000,000 times and my head was a mess. I swear that at that moment the only thing my body was screaming at me was, "Get the hell out of there." And I wish I had listened to my primal instincts, because then I would not have given him the opportunity to use all that charm and eloquence he had to anesthetize my neurons with an explanation of those that he knew how to give and that would easily convince any unwary like me. Upon seeing my shock, Ivan extended his hands in front of me without taking a step and asked me kindly to calm down. He told me that it was not what I thought. He explained that it was a spiritual ritual, and that those girls he had seen did it voluntarily as a kind of initiation. Somehow he convinced me that there was nothing wrong with it, and that he only documented those rituals because he felt a great fascination for that kind of things. And just as he had stated before, he told me that he only liked to collect things related to the occult, but nothing more. On the other hand, he assured me that those photos were taken during a spiritual ritual he witnessed in Scotland. Once again, his explanation did not convince me completely, but he had a good point, and the truth is that I wanted to believe him. I needed to. He held out his hand and I took it. Then he kissed me. That was the first time he did it. After the kiss, he asked me if I felt okay, and told me that if I wanted, I could stay with him that night. But if I didn't feel safe, he would take me home. The truth is that when I went to his house, I was expecting something else to happen that night. But after the incident, I felt so upset that I asked him to take me to my apartment. So, like a gentleman, he agreed and took me to my building. On the way, we hardly spoke, but Ivan would caress my hand from time to time and smile at me. That smile was hypnotic and made my whole being calm. However, when I got out of the car, after the goodbye kiss, he smiled at me again, and at that moment I noticed a sparkle in his eyes that, far from giving me warmth, made me feel a strange shiver. Nevertheless, like a true fool, I ignored him again. But very soon, I would understand the hard way that one should never ignore one's intuition. When I got home, I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to process what I had seen that night. As hard as I tried, I couldn't sleep. The symbols in his house, the pictures, the strange marks on the bodies of those women, it all seemed like something out of a horror movie. As soon as I woke up, I set out to investigate more about Ivan. So I started searching the internet, checking his social media profile, and looking for anything that had to do with him, but I didn't find anything alarming or compromising. Still, for some reason that did not reassure me. There was something inside me that told me I should be cautious, but on the other hand, I wanted to trust him. I really liked Ivan, so I just left the matter and tried not to give it more thought. A few days later, I received a message from Ivan inviting me to a party at his house. He told me that it would be a special night and that he wanted me to attend as his date. At first I hesitated a little, but then I accepted. I really wanted to forget about last time, and that everything would be like before that day. So the day of the party, I dressed up very well. I put on a beautiful dress and waited for him at the entrance of my building. He didn't take long to arrive and we left. Upon entering the place, the first thing I noticed was that there were more people than I expected. Everyone seemed to know Ivan very well, and the atmosphere from the beginning was strange, as if there was some kind of hidden tension in the air. Once again, my intuition was telling me that I was in danger, but stubborn as always, I ignored it again. The night went on, and at one point Ivan took me to a secluded room and told me he had something important to show me. As I entered, I saw an altar with lighted candles and more of those strange symbols. That made me feel a big knot in my stomach, even more when I saw that in the center of that altar were drawn the same symbols that I had seen in the photos he had told me he took in Scotland. My heart began to beat very fast, but I tried to keep my composure. I didn't want it to show how nervous I was at that moment. Then he told me that he hadn't been completely honest with me that night because he didn't want to scare me, and he started telling me about a group he belonged to. Some kind of secret society that sought power and knowledge through ancient rituals. Hearing that, everything started to make sense. My heart began to race. Somehow I knew that I was not there just because. Then I remembered all those girls I had seen in the pictures, and everything became clear in my mind. Those women had not been there by will. He had taken them as he was doing now with me. I realized that all this time he was simply manipulating me, preparing the ground to get to this day. I asked him what this was all about, and at my question, he smiled in a very sinister way and told me that I would know everything that night. Panic started to take over me, but I pretended not to notice and tried to find an excuse to get out of that place. But before I could say anything, someone else entered the room. It was an older man with a very intimidating presence. Ivan introduced me as the special guest, and the man told him that it was time to start. Ivan took me by the arm and led me to another room, a bigger and darker one. In the center of it, there was a circle drawn on the floor with what seemed to be salt, and suddenly a lot of people dressed in black robes started to arrive. The air began to get heavy, and for a moment I stopped feeling my legs. I tried to let go of Ivan, but he held me very tightly. I was panicking, and I was no longer able to hide it. All I could think of was that I had been a complete idiot. I had all the signs in front of me, and I decided to ignore them to pursue a stupid illusion. It was then that I saw a door ajar at the end of the room, and I took advantage of Ivan's carelessness to break free from his grip and run towards the door. I ran as fast as I could, leaving my heels lying in the hallway. I heard the screams behind me, but I didn't stop for an instant. It's amazing what adrenaline can do. I was never a great runner, but that night I swear that not even Usain Bolt himself could have caught up with me. Fortunately, I have a very good spatial memory and knew exactly where we had entered, so I ran at full speed until I found the exit in the dark. I went out into the street barefoot and crossed over to get into a Japanese restaurant on the other side, and from there, I hailed a cab to take me to the police station. Once at the station, I told them everything I had experienced, but it turned out that without concrete evidence, they could not do much. That night, I didn't want to go back to my apartment because I was too afraid that Ivan was going to look for me there. So I went to my parents' house and began to investigate about sex and their occult symbology. That's how I discovered that this cell to which Ivan belonged was known for making ritual sacrifices of animals, but the most radical wing was linked to cases of human sacrifices. Unfortunately, I was never able to gather enough information or evidence to incriminate Ivan. I blocked his number and deleted my Tinder profile, but just the same, fortunately for me, he never tried to contact me again. However, a couple of years after that terrifying incident, I learned that he had passed away in a car accident in 2020. Karma sometimes comes in unexpected ways. After almost 3 years without dating anyone after my last love relationship ended very badly, I thought that maybe it was time to return to the love arena and see if this time I was doing a little better. And for that, I decided to try my luck on Tinder, because I saw that other lesbian friends did pretty well meeting people through this application. After several days of sliding to the left, I finally made a match with a girl named Sophia, who besides being very pretty seemed to be nice and charming. We connected right away because of our love for vintage movies, something that is not very common, so I thought it was wonderful to meet someone who shared that particular passion with me. Her profile showed many photos of her posing outdoors at the beach, skiing, mountain climbing, camping, and her bio said she was new in town due to a demanding job and was trying to meet people and make connections in the area. Knowing this, it seemed to me that the ideal place for our first date would be the old movie theater in town, where they showed Hollywood classics from the 30s, which I hadn't visited in a while, mainly because I had no one to do it with and alone it was kind of boring. I proposed this plan to Sophia and she seemed delighted with the idea. I remember it was Thursday and I told her to meet me on Saturday, but she said she didn't want to wait that long to meet me, which I thought was very enthusiastic of her, since it was only 2 days away. Even so, she proposed that we meet on Friday, and I was fine with that. The next day we met at the cinema as we had agreed. She was pretty, although not as pretty as she was shown in the pictures, I must say. But she greeted me with a big smile, and we greeted each other with a kiss on the cheek. She seemed to be a very charming girl, and I liked that. We had a great time at the movies watching Charles Chaplin's City Lights. As we watched the movie, we had a lively conversation about our favorite movies of the time and joked that perhaps we were reincarnated souls of people who lived in those years. However, I noticed that while Sophia seemed rather shy and reserved at first, often leaving it to me to take the initiative and choose the topics of conversation. As our interaction progressed, she gradually loosened up and became somewhat more talkative. Over the course of the date, her confidence seemed to grow. She became much more talkative and charismatic, even going so far as to share too much of her personal life and ramble on a bit as she talked at length about her new job, her unbearable co-workers, and how stressful it was. When the movie was over, even though I had had a pretty good time, I was ready to go home, but she suggested with her characteristic enthusiasm that we go to the old dive bar next door for a drink together. Up to that point, I was really enjoying the date and didn't notice any warning signs from her, so I saw nothing wrong with going for drinks even though I wasn't a fan of the place nor of alcoholic beverages. However, this turned out to be one of the worst mistakes I have ever made in my life. When I look back and remember that evening, I just think about how different things would have been if I had just said no and gone home. But as they say, what's done is done. When we got to the bar, we sat next to each other on a couple of wooden stools, and each ordered a beer. With the music blaring, we had to get pretty close to be able to carry on a conversation. But that's when Sophia started to test the boundaries in a very obvious way, which started to make me feel quite uncomfortable. At first it was somewhat subtle physical contact, like leaning on my shoulder while talking in my ear, or touching my arm every now and then. But as the night progressed, she progressively went further and further, going so far as to put her hand on my lower back and leave it there. I didn't dislike her, but there wasn't enough trust between us for that kind of contact either. I felt she was overstepping her bounds, but I didn't want to let her know it up front so as not to make her uncomfortable. So every time she initiated an unwanted contact, I just tried to move away on the stool to signal that I didn't feel at ease. But she either didn't understand the signals, or she did, but still didn't care about making me uncomfortable. However, that wasn't the only thing that was uncomfortable, as little by little Sophia also began to steer our trivial conversations into much more personal and inappropriate territory, asking me reckless questions about my past relationships, my dating preferences, opinions on commitment, family, and other very personal details, as if she was pressing for intimate details of my life that I clearly preferred not to share so soon with a virtual stranger. His invasiveness was so much that he even dared to ask me about my tastes in intimacy. Realizing that the night was getting a little weird, I opted to only respond in a vague and polite way to redirect the conversation to other topics, as I was really feeling harassed. After less than an hour at the bar, The whole evening had gone from being fun and enjoyable to becoming tense, uncomfortable, and really disturbing. That's why as soon as I finished my beer, I announced that I had to go home, politely left cash at the bar to pay for my only beer, and said goodbye with a simple, "I had a good time, thanks for the evening." However, as I was leaving, Sophia quickly finished her beer and followed me, insisting that she wanted to walk me home, arguing that it was dark outside and could be dangerous. It was barely 8 o'clock at night. It was still light, and the city center is a very populated area. Plus, for her, it could also be dangerous to return alone after leaving me. There was no need for her to accompany me, but she insisted on doing so, and this began to set off alarm bells. Her questions, her inappropriate groping, and now this insistence to accompany me home. I didn't like this at all, but I didn't want to be rude to her either, so I tried to refuse in a kind but firm way. Then she told me that she just wanted to spend some more time with me because she really had nothing to do, and I had been the only nice person she had met lately. In the end, I did accept. But instead of having a nice chat like at the movies, we walked in awkward silence for several blocks as we headed towards my apartment building, just because I wanted to get this disastrous night over with quickly. As soon as I saw the entrance half a block away, Sophia overtook me and then suddenly stopped in front of me on the sidewalk. I barely reacted when she suddenly started asking if she could stay at my apartment with me, since she lived far away with roommates and rarely had alone time or privacy. I was in shock, and before I could process what kind of proposal was being made to me by someone I had just met a couple of hours ago, she grabbed my wrist tightly, and as I tried to pull away, Sophia begged me in a pathetic tone to change my mind and allow her to come up to the apartment with me. While she begged me to agree to that madness, Sophia squeezed my arm tighter and tighter, and I was surprised at how strong this girl really was, because no matter how hard I struggled, I couldn't get out of her grip. At that moment, I felt afraid, and I asked her to take her hands off me immediately. That distracted her, and as soon as she loosened her grip, I ran at full speed towards the entrance of the building. And while I was doing it, I could hear her calling me in a tone between harassing and pleading. My hands were shaking as I walked into the lobby and pressed the elevator button, watching dumbfounded as Sophia walked erratically down the sidewalk through the windows until she finally stormed away. As soon as I got to my apartment, I locked the door and lay on my back on my bed trying to process what had just happened. I felt very nervous. This woman was completely crazy, and now I knew where she lived. I felt so stupid that I had let her come with me. The days that followed this traumatic encounter, I could not shake the overwhelming feeling of being watched everywhere I went. I didn't know if it was my paranoia or if she was really following me. But my worst fears were confirmed one morning when I was getting ready to go to work. And as I was about to leave the building, the first thing I saw was Sophia, sitting at the bus stop just across the street. At that moment, I felt a knot in my stomach and my heart started beating frantically. I began to have a panic attack. I instantly went back to my apartment and called into work to say that I was sick and would not be able to attend. I was too upset to function or concentrate. Shortly after that episode, I came home to find a package waiting on my doorstep with a handwritten note addressed to my Tinder nickname. Despite my better judgment, I opened it, and what was inside were things that referenced our date. The movie ticket, a picture of Charlie Chaplin, and a selfie we took in the theater while waiting for the movie to start. If I was nervous before, now I was completely terrified by Sophia's harassing behavior. She was really freaking me out. So I didn't think anymore, and that same day I went straight to the police station. I told them in detail what was going on and gave them all the information I had. The box she left at my house, our conversations on Tinder, and her harassing messages which I didn't even want to see after the date. Fortunately, all of this gave the authorities what they needed to track her down and issue a restraining order preventing her from approaching or interacting with me again. I must confess that even weeks after receiving the closure of the police intervention, I still had that horrible feeling of being watched. I still looked behind my shoulder when I walked. It was an overwhelming feeling that did not disappear until after a long time. This experience taught me to be more careful and to be very attentive to the people I interact with. But above all, it taught me not to ignore warning signs, no matter how insignificant they may seem. Fortunately, I never heard from Sophia again. I never thought my life could take such a disastrous turn from downloading a simple dating app. I was going through a time of change in my life. I moved cities, changed jobs, and ended a 7-year marriage after my wife was unfaithful with her supposed best friend. Laura had been my girlfriend since she was 19, and 2 years later we were married. I was only 21 when I asked her to marry me, but we were so much in love at the time that we were sure we would spend the rest of our lives together. However, it turned out that this was a promise that only I was willing to keep. That was a very hard blow to me, but then I realized all the things I had missed out on by being married. In those years, most of my friends were enjoying life, going to parties, meeting girls, and having a good time without complications. I, on the other hand, was a married name, with all the responsibilities that implies, and I was also studying, so I didn't have much time for that kind of distractions. Unlike my ex-wife, I always respected our relationship, and I was never with another woman in the 9 years we were together. So after our divorce, when I became aware of it, I realized that it was time to recover some of the lost time and start living the bachelorhood as God intended. It was time to start doing the things I was deprived of because I was married, and among them was dating other women, but this time without commitment and without getting involved romantically. It was then when a friend recommended me to download the Tinder application, which he also used to get dates. So I listened to him and I opened a profile, and since then I started using it. I met a lot of girls through Tinder and had a few successful dates, but I was always very honest about the type of interaction I wanted. I don't like to play with anyone's feelings or expectations. So about 4 months after I started using the app, I made a match with a girl named Marta. Marta was brunette, had curly hair, and was very attractive, so she immediately caught my attention. We started talking and then exchanged numbers. She was very nice and was very mischievous in our conversations. I found this really interesting, and after chatting and flirting for a while, I proposed to meet her that same night. She agreed and at first asked me for my address to come to my house, but I told her that I better go to hers, as I did not feel completely comfortable giving my address to a stranger. She agreed, and then I asked her to send me her location. Marta didn't answer the message right away, which must have been a red flag for me, but at the time I didn't see her, as I was very excited to be able to meet her and spend the night with her. And since I had never had a problem with my dates up to that point, I didn't pay too much attention to her. She replied about 10 minutes later, sending me her current location, which was relatively close to where I lived, so after about 10 minutes I was on my way. The place the map pointed me to was an apartment complex that was located in a suburb of the city. The place was pretty dark when I arrived, and the truth is that it didn't look very good. But I was the one who insisted on going to her apartment, so I just drove to the parking lot and texted her to let her know I was already there. She told me that she had already seen me, since I gave her the directions to the car where I was going. Then she told me to park where I was, that she was already coming down the stairs to pick me up and take me with her to her apartment. I did what she told me, but as soon as I turned off the car, I was approached by 2 men who came out of nowhere. They opened the door, took me out of the car, and began to beat me savagely without mediating words. They knocked me down to the floor, and there they continued to beat me. Then they searched me and took my wallet, my watch, my graduation ring, which was gold, and then they got into the car and took everything of value they found there, including my laptop and my cell phone. After that, They just took everything and ran away until they got lost in a dark alley. I don't know why they didn't take my car. When the guys left, the only thing I did was to stay lying on the pavement for a while, curled up in myself. The pain was so intense that I had no strength to even ask for help, and every time I tried to sit up, I just collapsed again. So I just stayed there for a while, waited to recover a little, and then as best I could, I got in the car and drove to the nearest hospital. During the trip to the medical center, I thought I would faint a couple of times due to the intense pain I felt in my ribs, but fortunately I didn't and made it to the hospital. There I received emergency treatment, and after taking a couple of x-rays, I found out that I had a couple of broken ribs, and one of them almost punctured my right lung. I also had serious bruises in several parts of my body. After applying the corresponding treatment and administering a lot of painkillers, I was discharged 2 days later, and the doctor ordered me to rest absolutely for the next 2 weeks. Fortunately, the day after the incident, my friend did me the favor of buying me a new cell phone, and then I was able to change my bank and credit card passwords, and also the passwords of my social networks, to avoid that they could enter my bank accounts or scam my friends through my networks. I also entered my WhatsApp to see if Marta had written me after the robbery, hoping that she had nothing to do with it. But our conversation had been deleted and the number had been blocked. Also, her Tinder profile was deleted, so it was all a hoax and I fell into the trap. This has been by far the worst experience I've had, not only with dating, but in my entire life. I still didn't stop using Tinder, but now I'm much more cautious when I meet someone and always try to meet in public places first.